It wasn't supposed to end this way. Not on our 10th anniversary. Not after everything I'd sacrificed. I stood frozen in the doorway of my husband's office, watching as Miles Blackwood, heir to the Blackwood Industries fortune, tangled his fingers through the copper hair of his executive assistant. She was perched on his mahogany desk, the same desk his grandfather had used to build their empire. Her blouse unbuttoned, her lipstick smeared across his collar. They hadn't even heard me enter. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. Is this what you've been working late on, Miles? My voice cut through their moment like glass. The Henderson acquisition? Or should I call it the Cassidy acquisition? The young woman, Cassidy, scrambled off the desk, hastily buttoning her blouse. Miles didn't move, didn't startle, didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, he sighed and straightened his tie with practiced indifference. "Olivia," he said, my name dropping from his lips like an inconvenience. "You weren't supposed to be here." That was his response. Not an apology, not an explanation. Just irritation that his carefully orchestrated affair had been interrupted by his wife. "Clearly," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I thought I'd surprise you, bring dinner to celebrate our anniversary." I gestured to the bag of takeout from Marcello's, the restaurant where we'd had our first date, now dangling forgotten from my fingertips. The smell of truffle pasta filled the room, mixing with Cassidy's overpowering perfume. Miles checked his watch, the vintage Rolex I'd given him last Christmas. "Is that today? I scheduled an important client dinner. With your assistant?" "On." "The desk?" The words tasted bitter. Cassidy grabbed her purse and tried to slide past me. "I should go." "Stay." Miles's command stopped her instantly. "Olivia and I need to have a conversation that's been coming for a while, and I'd prefer you hear it too." That's when I knew. This wasn't a momentary lapse, not a one-time mistake. This was established, comfortable, routine. Miles walked around the desk, no trace of guilt in his posture. At 43, he was still strikingly handsome. Salt and pepper hair, sharp blue eyes, the confident stride that came from generations of wealth and privilege. I'd once found that confidence intoxicating. Now it just seemed cruel. "We need to be realistic," he said, pouring himself a glass of bourbon from the crystal decanter on the sideboard. He didn't offer me one. "When was the last time you actually felt happy in this marriage?" The question blindsided me. Somehow, in the span of 3 minutes, I'd gone from betrayed wife to problem that needed solving. "You're blaming me for your affair?" I asked, incredulous. "I'm acknowledging what we both know." He took a slow sip. "We married too young. You wanted the stability of the Blackwood name. I needed a suitable wife who understood business and family obligations. For a while, it worked." "For a while?" My voice cracked. 10 years is a while to you?" "It's been at least 3 since we've had any real connection." He glanced at Cassidy, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "I've found something else. Something real." I laughed, a hollow, strangled sound. "With your 26-year-old assistant? How original, Miles." "Cassidy understands the pressures I'm under," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "She supports my vision for the company. Reminds me of how you used to be, actually, before you got so caught up in your charity projects." Those charity projects had raised millions for education in underserved communities. Programs Miles had praised in public while dismissing in private. "When exactly were you planning to tell me?" I asked, the takeout bag now crumpled in my clenched fist. "After the Westlake merger closes next month." He said it so casually, like discussing a dental appointment. "I've had papers drawn up. You'll be well taken care of. The Riverdale house, a generous settlement. Your foundation fully funded for 5 years. You've already planned our divorce. It wasn't a question. It seemed kinder than prolonging the inevitable. Cassidy finally spoke, her voice softer than I expected. For what it's worth, this isn't how we wanted you to find out. I turned to really look at her. Cassidy Chen, Harvard Business School graduate. Miles's right hand for the past 18 months. Always impeccably dressed, unfailingly efficient. I'd actually liked her. Had even confided in her once about planning Miles's surprise birthday party. How long? I asked. Olivia, Miles started. No. I want to hear it from her. Cassidy met my gaze. 7 months. 7 months. While I'd been renovating our Hampton Beach house with the nursery I thought Miles finally wanted. While I'd been injecting myself with fertility drugs that made me bloated and emotional because the Blackwood legacy needed an heir. Something inside me snapped. Not with a dramatic crash, but with the quiet finality of a thread pulled past its breaking point. You can have him, I said to Cassidy, surprising us all. But he's not the prize you think he is. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Miles's face. He'd expected tears, recriminations, perhaps bargaining. Not this. Eerie calm. The board meeting tomorrow, I said, gathering my purse. I assume you'll want me there as planned? To charm the old guard members who still equate marriage with stability? Miles hesitated. It would be appreciated. We can announce changes after the quarter closes. I smiled, a smile I didn't recognize in myself. Cold, calculated. Of course. One last performance for the Blackwood name. As I turned to leave, Miles called after me. You're taking this better than expected. I know it's a shock, but in time you'll see this is best for everyone. I paused at the door. Do you remember what your father told us at our engagement party? Never underestimate a wounded opponent. You should have paid attention, Miles. The elevator doors closed on his confused expression. As I descended 82 floors to the lobby of Blackwood Tower, I made 3 calls. First to Lawrence Hoffman, Miles's father's attorney and the keeper of the original Blackwood Family Trust. Second to Diane Mercer, my college roommate and now partner at the city's most aggressive corporate law firm. And third to Vincent Blackwood, Miles's estranged uncle and the one person who hated Blackwood Industries' current leadership as much as I suddenly did. It's happening, I said when Vincent answered. Are you still interested in that conversation we had at Christmas? Depends, his gruff voice replied. Are you finally ready to do what needs to be done? I stepped out into the cool September air, the weight of a decade falling away with each breath. Yes, I said. It's time to take back what's ours. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. My history with the Blackwoods began 12 years ago at a charity gala in Westport. I was 26, fresh out of my MBA program, working 80-hour weeks at a boutique investment firm. The kind of place where women were expected to be twice as smart and half as visible as their male counterparts. I'd helped secure the firm's donation to the Children's Hospital that night, which earned me an invitation, but not a seat at the main table. Instead, I found myself at the bar, reviewing quarterly projections on my phone while nursing a gin and tonic. If you're that bored already, you're at the wrong party, a voice said. I looked up to find Miles Blackwood watching me with amusement. Everyone knew who he was, heir to one of the largest privately held conglomerates in the Northeast, infamous bachelor, fixture of society pages. He was older than me by 5 years, but carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. Not bored, I replied. Just multitasking. He glanced at my phone. Thornton figures? Their Asian markets are underperforming. You'd do better shifting focus to their infrastructure investments. I was surprised, enough to put my phone down. That's not public information. It is if you're on their board. He gestured to the bartender for 2 drinks. Miles Blackwood. I know who you are. Olivia Harrington. You're the one who restructured the Mendez acquisition last quarter. Wasn't a question. Creative work. My father was impressed. That was how it started. A conversation about market strategies that turned into dinner the following week. I was guarded at first, suspicious of his attention and wary of his reputation. But Miles was different with me. He asked about my analysis, challenged my thinking, listened to my ideas about emerging markets. For the first time in my career, I felt truly seen. 6 months later, he proposed at his family's lake house in the Adirondacks. 18 months after that, I became Olivia Blackwood, the carefully chosen bride who would help Miles continue the dynasty his grandfather had built. I thought I understood what I was signing up for: the social obligations, the family politics, the expectations. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly I'd be expected to set aside my own ambitions. You don't need to work anymore, Gerald Blackwood, Miles's father, told me over breakfast one morning. Your job now is to support Miles and represent the family. I looked to my husband for support, but Miles just squeezed my hand under the table. Later, in private, he explained. Dad's old-fashioned, but he means well. You can still pursue your projects. Just maybe focus on the philanthropic side? It would mean a lot to him, to both of us. Step by step, I reorganized my life around the Blackwood name. I resigned from my firm, taking a break that somehow became permanent. I joined the right boards, chaired the right committees, hosted the right parties. I learned the unspoken language of old money and corporate power. I became the perfect corporate wife, and for a while, it seemed worth it. Miles and I were partners. He sought my counsel on deals, valued my insights on strategy. We entertained, investors in our penthouse, spent weekends with potential partners on our yacht. Behind closed doors, we dissected conversations and planned moves like chess players. I may have given up my career, but I was helping build something bigger, wasn't? The cracks appeared gradually. A meeting I wasn't invited to. A conversation that stopped when I entered the room. Miles dismissing my concerns about a risky acquisition. Small things, easily explained away. He was busy. The pressure was intense. It wasn't personal. Then came the fertility treatments. The Blackwood legacy needed an heir, and our carefully planned life hit an unexpected roadblock. 3 years of specialists, procedures, disappointments. Miles was supportive at first, then distant, then openly frustrated. Maybe we should consider other options, he suggested after our 3rd failed IVF attempt. We're not getting any younger, but Gerald was insistent. A true Blackwood heir or none at all, he declared from his hospital bed after his first heart attack. The company stays in the family. As Miles took on more responsibility with his father's declining health, our marriage became increasingly functional. We operated like business partners with separate bedrooms and coordinated public appearances. I threw myself into my foundation, work, building educational programs in communities that the Blackwood companies often displaced with their developments. I wasn't blind to our problems, but I was committed to the life we'd built. A part of me believed we could find our way back once the pressure eased, after the next big deal, after his father stabilized, after we finally had the child we'd been trying for. Gerald's death 8 months ago changed everything. Miles became sole CEO, inheriting both his father's position and his controlling management style. Board members who had been with the company for decades were pushed out. Long-standing charitable commitments were cut. The company that had once prided itself on being family-owned and community-focused began to reshape itself in the image of the cutthroat conglomerates we'd once criticized. I voiced my concerns, reminding Miles of his father's vision. Times change, he told me. Dad's approach doesn't work in today's market. It was around then that Cassidy Chen was promoted from the analyst team to become Miles's executive assistant. Young, brilliant, eager to please. I'd noticed her at the company holiday party. Everyone had. She had that hungry look I recognized from my own early career days. Miles spoke highly of her analytical skills, her work ethic, her fresh perspective. I never suspected. Or perhaps I didn't want to see it. The night before our anniversary, I overheard Miles on the phone in his study. "I can't tonight." "Yes, I know. She's planned something for the anniversary. Just one more month until everything's in place." I told myself he was talking about the Westlake merger. I convinced myself to believe it, because the alternative was too painful to consider. Even as I made reservations at Marcello's, ordered his favorite wine, and prepared to surprise him at his office, a part of me already knew. Now, standing in the back of a taxi with the remnants of our anniversary dinner dumped in a street trash, I felt something unexpected. Relief. The pretense was over. The perfect marriage, the supportive wife, the united front, it had all been an illusion carefully maintained for the benefit of others. My phone lit up with a text from Vincent Blackwood. "Penthouse, 9 p.m. Bring everything you've got," I instructed. The driver to change course. I wasn't going home to cry. I was going to war. Vincent Blackwood's penthouse occupied the top floor of a pre-war building in the West Village, worlds away from the sleek glass tower where Miles and I lived. The doorman recognized me immediately. I'd been here for the occasional holiday when family politics demanded at least a pretense of unity. "Mrs. Blackwood, always a pleasure," he said, tipping his cap. "Mr. Vincent is expecting you." The elevator opened directly into Vincent's home, a space that felt more like an eccentric professor's library than the residence of a man who once controlled half of Blackwood Industries' international divisions. Books lined every wall. Vintage maps and ancient artifacts competed for space with modern art and family photographs from happier times. Vincent himself stood by the windows overlooking the city, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. At 68, he was still imposing, tall, and lean with the same piercing blue eyes as his nephew, though his were framed by deeper lines and set beneath a shock of unruly white hair. "Right on time," he said, not turning around. "I assume since you're here, you've finally seen Miles, for what he is." I set my purse down on a leather chair. "You've been telling me for years, and you've been defending him for just as long." Now he turned, studying me with a shrewd gaze. "What changed?" "I found him with Cassidy Chen, in his office, on our anniversary." Vincent didn't offer sympathy or outrage. Instead, he nodded slowly. Predictable. Gerald was the same way, had a new assistant every few years. The board called them executive transitions. Miles's mother drank herself to death over it. He gestured, for me to sit, then poured me a drink without asking if I wanted one. "What exactly do you want, Olivia? Revenge? Money? The satisfaction of a public scandal?" I took a sip, welcoming the burn. "I want what should have been mine all along. Recognition for the work I've done. A seat at the table I helped build. You want Blackwood Industries." He made it sound both impossible and inevitable. Not all of it. Just the parts that matter. A smile spread across Vincent's face, the first genuine one I'd seen from him in years. "Now you're talking like a Blackwood." He walked to a desk in the corner, unlocked a drawer, and withdrew a worn leather portfolio. "Gerald and I founded the company together, built it from nothing, but we had different visions. He wanted expansion, at any cost. I wanted sustainable growth. When Miles joined the firm after business school, he sided with his father. 2 against 1. "They forced you out," I said. "It wasn't a question. This much was family lore." "They bought me out," Vincent corrected. "On paper, very generously, but they structured the deal to minimize my ongoing influence. I kept 30% of voting shares but lost my board seat. With Gerald's 40% and Miles's 15%, plus loyal board members. They had control. Until Gerald died, I said, seeing where this was going. Vincent's eyes gleamed. Gerald's shares should have been split between Miles and his sister, Julia. But Julia signed over her voting rights to Miles years ago when she moved to Europe. She wanted nothing to do with the family business. So Miles now controls 55% of voting shares, I concluded. Yours isn't enough to challenge him. Not alone. No. Vincent opened the portfolio, revealing documents I recognized. The original Blackwood Family Trust Agreement. But Gerald's old-fashioned values might be our salvation. He pointed to a clause I'd never seen before. The Blackwood Family Trust stipulates that in the event of divorce, a spouse who has been married to a Blackwood for 10 years or more and has actively participated in company affairs retains 5% of family shares, provided the divorce isn't initiated by the spouse. My mind raced. Miles just told me he's already prepared divorce papers. Exactly. Vincent's smile widened. And with your foundation's work with Blackwood communities, no one can claim you haven't been involved in company affairs. So I could get 5% of voting shares, I said, running the calculations. Combined with your 30%, we'd have 35%, Vincent finished. Not enough for control. My momentary hope deflated. Then what's the point? Because there's more. Vincent flipped to another section of the agreement. There's a lesser-known clause that Gerald insisted on when we structured the original trust. If any family member is found to have engaged in conduct that harms the company's reputation or violates its ethical guidelines, their voting shares can be temporarily frozen pending a board investigation. I leaned forward. And a public scandal. With his assistant would qualify? A decade ago, maybe not. But in the age of Thou Art Me Too and corporate governance scrutiny? Absolutely, particularly given that Miles promoted her rapidly and approved unusual compensation packages that bypassed normal channels. How do you know that? I asked, surprised. Vincent smiled. I may be out of day-to-day operations, but I still have friends in the company, loyal people who keep me informed. I considered the implications. So Miles's shares could be frozen. Then with our 35%, we'd have the largest voting bloc. For a limited time, Vincent cautioned. The investigation would eventually conclude, and without concrete evidence of serious misconduct beyond the affair, his shares would be unfrozen. How long would we have? 30 days, maybe 45 if the lawyers drag it out. I stood and walked to the window, gazing at the city lights. What could we accomplish in a month? With the right preparation? Everything. Vincent's reflection in the glass looked energized, years younger. We could call a special board meeting, replace key executives, restructure divisions, even sell off parts of the company Miles has been mismanaging. I want the education division, I said without hesitation, and the community development projects. Vincent raised an eyebrow. The least profitable segments. The most meaningful, I corrected. The ones with potential to do actual good while still delivering returns. The ones Miles has been gutting for short-term gains. Vincent studied me for a long moment. You know, Gerald always said you were wasted as a corporate wife. That in another era, you would have run the company better than any of us. The compliment, especially coming from a man who rarely offered praise, caught me off guard. He said that? More than once. Vincent rejoined me at the window. But we'll need more than just frozen shares and board maneuvers. We need allies, information, leverage. I pulled my phone from my purse. That's why I called Diane Mercer. She's meeting us here at 10. The corporate raider turned defense attorney? Vincent looked impressed. Good choice. And Lawrence Hoffman, I added. Gerald's personal attorney. Vincent's eyebrows shot up. Larry's been retired for years. Not fully. He still handles the family trust, and he owes me a favor. What kind of favor? I met Vincent's gaze directly. I'm the one who convinced Miles not to contest Gerald's competency during his final illness. Larry knows if I hadn't intervened, Miles would have tried to take control months earlier, and the original trust might not have survived intact. Vincent's laugh was short and surprised. You've been playing a longer game than I realized. I wasn't playing anything, I said honestly. I was protecting a man I respected from a son who couldn't wait to seize power. I didn't expect to need allies later, the doorman called up to announce Diane's arrival. Before Vincent went to let her in, he put a hand on my shoulder. One question, Olivia. When this is over, when you have what you want, what happens to Miles? I considered the question carefully. Despite everything, despite the hurt and betrayal still fresh in my chest, I found no desire for vengeance. Miles gets what he's always really wanted, I said finally. Freedom from his father's legacy and expectations. He can keep his international divisions and his new life with Cassidy. I don't want to destroy him. I just want what I've earned. Vincent nodded slowly. Then let's get to work. The next morning, I arrived at Blackwood Tower at precisely 8:15 a.m., just as I had for countless board meetings over the years. I wore a dove-gray suit, conservative, expensive, forgettable, and the sapphire. Earrings Gerald had given me when Miles and I announced our engagement. My wedding ring felt heavy on my finger, a prop in what would be my final performance as Miles Blackwood's devoted wife. The executive floor hummed with pre-meeting energy. Assistants arranged coffee service and distributed presentation materials. Board members congregated in small groups, exchanging pleasantries and subtle positioning statements. No one knew yet that this quarterly gathering would become a pivotal moment in Blackwood Industries' history. Miles was already in the boardroom, reviewing slides with Cassidy at his side. If anyone thought it strange that his executive assistant was briefing him rather than the CFO, they didn't show it. When he saw me, something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, that I'd actually shown up after last night's discovery. Olivia, he said, coming to kiss my cheek as if nothing had happened. Thank you for being here. His cologne mixed with a faint trace of Cassidy's perfume. I suppressed a shudder and smiled. Of course, family first, right? Miles introduced me to two new board members, tech executives he'd brought on after forcing out Gerald's old allies, then steered me toward Eleanor Whitford, the 70-year-old, matriarch of a shipping dynasty and the board's most conservative member. Eleanor's been asking about your education initiative, Miles murmured. She's on the fence about the Westlake merger. A little reassurance would help. I nodded, understanding my role perfectly. For years, I'd been Miles's secret weapon with the old guard, the elegant wife who made the Blackwood name seem stable and trustworthy, even as he pushed the company in increasingly aggressive directions. Eleanor, how lovely to see you, I said, embracing the older woman warmly. Miles mentioned you had questions about the Richmond Heights project. For 15 minutes, I described the community college scholarship program I'd established for students from neighborhoods where Blackwood developments had displaced families. Eleanor nodded approvingly, especially when I mentioned the potential for positive press coverage. Your young man has big plans, she said, glancing toward Miles. Gerald would be proud, though perhaps a bit cautious. This merger moves quickly. Miles honors his father's legacy in his own way, I replied carefully. He understands that adaptation is necessary in today's market. Eleanor patted my hand. You bring balance to his vision. I've always said that. If only that were true, I thought. The meeting began precisely at 9. Miles took his place at the head of the table, confidence radiating from every gesture. This was his domain. 22 people representing billions in assets, all focused on his words, his vision, his leadership. I sat in my usual place halfway, down the table, notepad ready, pleasant smile fixed in place. For 2 hours, I watched the Miles Blackwood show. Quarterly results, strong. Market projections, optimistic. The Westlake merger, transformational. He was charismatic, decisive, persuasive. Even knowing what I now knew about him, I could understand why people followed him. Why I had followed him. And now, Miles said, I'd like Cassidy to walk us through the integration timeline for Westlake's technology division. She rose gracefully, distributing tablets with her presentation. As she spoke about synergies and efficiencies, I noted how the younger board members leaned forward, impressed by her command of the material. The older members, however, exchanged glances. This was unusual, an executive assistant presenting on strategic integration. When the chairman called for questions, Eleanor spoke first. Ms. Chen, these projections assume significant staff reductions. At Westlake, what analysis supports these numbers? Current market conditions support aggressive streamlining, Cassidy replied smoothly. The savings are conservative estimates. Forgive an old woman's confusion, Eleanor pressed, but weren't you in the analyst pool just months ago? This represents quite a rapid rise to presenting merger strategy. Miles intervened. Cassidy has my complete confidence. Her insights have been invaluable to this process. A meaningful look passed between Eleanor and Richard Braddock, Gerald's longtime friend and the company's former counsel. My phone vibrated silently in my lap. A text from Vincent. In position. Proceed when ready. The chairman glanced at his watch. We should move to a vote on the preliminary merger approval. This was the moment. I took a deep breath, placed my hands flat on the table, and said clearly, Before we proceed, I'd like to address the board on a matter of governance. Miles's head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing slightly. Olivia, perhaps we can discuss this privately after. It concerns the company directly, I continued, my voice steady, and impacts today's vote. The chairman, clearly caught off guard, nodded. The chair recognizes Olivia Blackwood. I stood, feeling 22 pairs of eyes on me. For 10 years, I've been proud to support Blackwood Industries in any way I could. I've hosted your families, championed our community initiatives, and worked to uphold the values Gerald Blackwood instilled in this company. Miles's expression darkened. He knew something was wrong but couldn't stop me without creating a scene. Yesterday, I continued, I discovered that my husband has been engaged in a relationship with his executive assistant, Ms. Chen, for the past 7 months. A relationship that coincided with her unusual promotion path and influence over company decisions. The room went utterly still. Cassidy's face drained of color. Miles stood abruptly. This is a personal matter, he said sharply. It has no bearing on company business. I disagree, came a voice from the doorway. Lawrence Hoffman stood there, bow tie perfectly centered beneath his lined face. As trustee for the Blackwood Family Trust, I believe it falls directly under the ethics provisions. Miles's confidence faltered visibly. Larry, what are you doing here? Fulfilling my fiduciary duty, the elderly lawyer replied, entering the room and placing a folder on the table. Mrs. Blackwood contacted me with concerns about potential violations of the trust's ethical governance requirements. Lawrence Hoffman pulled a document from his briefcase. The notification arrived at 7:48 p.m. As trustee of the family holdings, I was copied on the communication. He handed copies to the chairman and corporate secretary, who scanned them with widening eyes. This changes everything, the chairman said gravely. The court may rule on board governance, but it cannot stop a federal investigation. Our duty now is clear. We must protect the company's interests separate from any individuals. Miles slammed his hand on the table. This is orchestrated. You going behind my back to regulators? We didn't contact the SEC, I interrupted quietly. Cassidy Chen did. The room went absolutely still. What? Miles whispered. Vincent handed him a tablet displaying a news article published minutes earlier. The headline read, Whistleblower comes forward in Blackwood Westlake merger probe, Jixi. Realized she was being set up as the fall person, I explained. Once the affair became public, you'd have blamed her for the financial improprieties. She made a deal for immunity instead. Miles sank into the nearest chair, the fight visibly draining from him. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked utterly defeated. The chairman cleared his throat. In light of these extraordinary developments, I believe we must act decisively to protect shareholder interests. I call for an immediate vote on temporary leadership structure pending resolution of the investigations. One by one, the board members voted. The final tally was 16-5. By 10:47 p.m., Vincent Blackwood had been named Interim Chief Executive Officer of Blackwood Industries. The Westlake merger was officially suspended, and a special committee was formed to oversee a corporate restructuring, with me as its chair. As the meeting adjourned, directors filed out quietly, the weight of the night's events visible in their solemn expressions. Miles remained seated, staring at nothing. When only Vincent, Eleanor, and I remained, he finally looked up. "You'll destroy everything my father built," he said, his voice hollow. "The market will punish the stock. Competitors will circle. This company won't survive. The company was surviving just fine before you started gambling with its future," Vincent replied evenly. Miles ignored him, his eyes fixed on me. Was any of it real? Us? The question caught me off guard with its raw vulnerability. Despite everything, the betrayal, the lies, the last 48 hours of corporate warfare, I found I couldn't be cruel in this moment. "Yes," I said softly. "It was real. Until it wasn't." Eleanor touched my shoulder gently. "Come, dear, there's nothing more to be said tonight." As we walked toward the door, Miles called after me one last time. "What happens now?" I turned back. "Tomorrow, Vincent announces the restructuring. The day after, our lawyers file the divorce papers. The narrative will be that we're both stepping back during a difficult personal time. You'll get a generous settlement, a dignified exit, and a fresh start if you cooperate fully with the investigations. And if I don't? Then we release everything. The affairs, plural, not just Cassidy. The financial manipulations, the recordings of you threatening employees who questioned your decisions." I met his gaze steadily. "Your choice, Miles. But for once, think beyond yourself." He said nothing as we left, a solitary figure in an empty boardroom that had been the center of his universe just 24 hours earlier. In the elevator, Eleanor squeezed my hand. "Gerald would be proud," she said quietly. "Not just of what you did, but how you did it." Vincent nodded in agreement. Protecting the company while offering Miles a dignified exit. That's exactly what my brother would have done. I leaned against the cool elevator wall, suddenly exhausted. "It's not over yet," I reminded them. "There's still the SEC investigation, the restructuring, the inevitably nasty divorce proceedings. But the hardest part is done," Vincent said. "You stood up to him. You reclaimed what he took from you." As the elevator descended 82 floors, I closed my eyes and allowed myself, for the first time since finding Miles and Cassidy together, to feel the full weight of everything that had happened and everything that had changed. I had arrived at Blackwood Tower this morning as Miles Blackwood's wife, a role that had defined me for a decade. I was leaving as something else entirely, something I was only beginning to recognize. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of 16-hour days, conference rooms, and legal pads filled with my increasingly illegible handwriting. Every division of Blackwood Industries required immediate attention. The international losses Miles had hidden turned out to be worse than initially reported, nearly $580 million once the forensic accountants finished their review. The Westlake merger collapsed entirely when their board withdrew after the SEC investigation became public. Blackwood stock plummeted 26% in 3 days. Business channels ran hourly segments analyzing the company's crisis. Former Executives gave interviews speculating about who knew what and when. Industry rivals began approaching our top talent with lucrative offers to jump ship. Through it all, Vincent remained remarkably steady. At 68, he should have been enjoying retirement, not working until midnight, stabilizing a company in crisis. Yet he seemed energized by the challenge, moving through the executive floor with purpose and clarity, reassuring employees and investors alike that Blackwood Industries would emerge stronger from this turmoil. I focused on the restructuring committee's work, determined to protect the parts of the company that aligned with Gerald's original vision. The education division, though small, had established scholarship programs in 12 cities where Blackwood Developments operated. The community investment arm had built affordable housing, funded healthcare clinics, and supported local businesses. These were the initiatives Miles had deemed low-return distractions. These were precisely what I was fighting to save. On the 15th day after the emergency board meeting, I arrived at my temporary office on the 70th floor to find Diane, Mercer waiting, a thick folder tucked under her arm. "The divorce papers are ready," she said without preamble. "Miles's lawyers have reviewed the terms. They're prepared to sign today if you approve." I gestured for her to sit. That was fast. The SEC investigation changed the calculation. Diane Dye opened the folder, revealing the agreement. "Miles wants this resolved quickly and quietly. The longer it drags on, the more exposure he faces." I scanned the document, noting the key provisions. Miles would keep the Manhattan penthouse and the property in Switzerland. I would take the Hamptons house and the London apartment. Financial assets would be divided based on a formula Lawrence Hoffman had developed using the family trust guidelines. More importantly, my 5% of Blackwood voting shares would be formalized, with provisions preventing Miles from challenging them in the future. "This is remarkably uncontested," I observed. "No alimony claims or offset demands?" Diane nodded. "Miles's focus is elsewhere. The SEC has offered him a settlement, cooperation in exchange for reduced penalties. He's negotiating personal immunity." Wasn't surprised. Self-preservation had always been Miles's strongest instinct. What about the restructuring? Has he agreed to our plan? "He's recused himself from all operational decisions pending resolution of the investigations." Diane tapped the final page. "Once you sign this, it's over. You'll be divorced before the month ends. 10 years of marriage, dissolved in 15 days. I should have felt something more. Grief, perhaps, or at least a sense of loss. Instead, I felt a strange lightness, as if setting down a heavy burden I'd carried for too long. I signed my name on the designated lines, the pen moving smoothly across each page. When I finished, Diane gathered the documents and stood. "I'll file these today," she said. "Congratulations, Olivia. You've handled this situation with remarkable poise." After she left, I walked to the window, gazing out at the city stretching before me. Somewhere down there, Miles was likely signing his copies, formally ending our life together. The thought triggered an unexpected wave of memories. Our first meeting at that charity gala, the proposal at the lake house, countless dinner parties and board meetings and quiet moments in between. Not all of it had been bad. That was the hardest truth to reconcile. My phone buzzed with a text from Vincent. "Boardroom in 10, restructuring vote today." I gathered my notes and presentation materials, pushing personal reflections aside. The time for looking backward had ended. Today was about securing Blackwood Industries' future, and by extension, my own. The boardroom felt different now. We'd implemented an immediate redecoration, replacing the dark mahogany and leather with lighter woods and brighter fabrics. Gerald's portrait had been rehung in a place of honor. The change was symbolic but necessary, a visual reminder that the company was charting a new course. Directors filed in, subdued but resolute. The past 2 weeks had been difficult for everyone, with daily revelations about Miles's mismanagement surfacing in the financial and mainstream press. Yet the worst seemed behind us. The stock had stabilized. Key executives had recommitted after Vincent personally reached out to each one. Clients had largely maintained their contracts after receiving assurances of continuity. Vincent called the meeting to order, his voice steady and authoritative. Thank you all for your extraordinary service during this challenging period. Today's agenda focuses on the Restructuring Committee's recommendations for Blackwood Industries. Path forward. He nodded to me, and I rose to present the plan we'd spent countless hours developing. The strategy was bold but grounded in Gerald's original principles: community investment alongside profit, sustainable growth rather than short-term gains, ethical governance above all. The committee recommends dividing Blackwood Industries into 3 distinct entities, I began, advancing to the first slide. Blackwood Development will continue our core real estate operations. Blackwood Community Partners will expand our education and community investment initiatives into a standalone social enterprise. And Blackwood Ventures will manage our technology, investments and innovation pipeline. For the next 40 minutes, I detailed the restructuring, operational changes, leadership appointments, financial projections. The new structure would allow each division to pursue its mission with dedicated resources and appropriate metrics for success. The community arm would operate as a public benefit corporation, with profits reinvested in its social mission. The Development Company would maintain its commercial focus, but with strengthened ethical guidelines. The Ventures Group would concentrate on technologies that balanced innovation with social responsibility. As I concluded, I saw something I hadn't expected on the faces around the table. Not just agreement, but enthusiasm. Even directors who had initially opposed our emergency actions were nodding thoughtfully. Questions? Vincent asked when I finished. Richard Braddock raised his hand. Who leads these divisions in the new structure? We're recommending internal promotions for development and ventures, I replied. Marcus Chen from the Western region will head development. Dr. Layla Washington from our technology group will lead ventures. And community partners? Eleanor asked, though her knowing smile suggested she already anticipated the answer. The committee recommends me for that role, I said, meeting her gaze, with appropriate governance safeguards to address any concerns about conflicts of interest. The room fell silent as directors processed this final piece. It was an unconventional move, the soon-to-be ex-wife of the former CEO taking control of a significant piece of the restructured company. But it made sense. I had built the education programs from the ground up. I understood the communities where we operated. Most importantly, I believed in the mission with a conviction that couldn't be manufactured. I support this recommendation, Eleanor said firmly, breaking the silence. Mrs. Blackwood, Olivia, has demonstrated exceptional judgment and commitment during this crisis. Her vision for community partners aligns perfectly with Gerald's original intentions for the company's social impact. Vincent nodded. I concur. The committee has proposed strong governance controls, including an independent board for community partners and clear separation of operational decisions. One by one, directors voiced their opinions. Some expressed reservations about the pace of change. Others questioned specific aspects of the financial arrangements between the 3 entities. But no one directly opposed the fundamental restructuring or the leadership recommendations. When the chairman called for the formal vote, the result was unexpectedly decisive. 19 in favor, 3 abstentions, 0 opposing. Blackwood Industries would be transformed, and I would lead 1/3 of its new incarnation. As the meeting adjourned, directors approached to offer congratulations and support. Eleanor embraced me warmly. Richard shook my hand with genuine respect. Even those who had initially sided with Miles acknowledged the thoroughness of our plan. I gathered my materials, a strange sense of unreality washing over me. 30 days. Ago, I had discovered my husband's betrayal. Today, I had secured leadership of a newly created company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The juxtaposition was so stark it seemed almost fictional. Vincent found me as the boardroom emptied. "Well done," he said simply. "Gerald would be proud." "I keep hearing that," I replied with a faint smile. "I wish I could have known him better." "You embodied his principles even when his own son abandoned them." Vincent glanced at his watch. "The press announcement goes out at 4. Are you ready for what comes next?" I considered the question. The media would dissect every aspect of this story: the personal betrayal, the corporate drama, my new role. There would be skeptics questioning my qualifications, cynics suggesting I'd orchestrated everything from the beginning, gossips fixating on the salacious details of my failed marriage. "I'm ready," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "Whatever happens, it's my story now." Vincent nodded approvingly. That's precisely what Gerald would have said. As we walked toward the executive elevator, my phone buzzed with an incoming email. The subject line read simply, "Congratulations." It was from Miles. I hesitated before opening it, unsure what to expect. Bitterness? Threats? A last-minute attempt to undermine the restructuring? The message was brief, just 3 sentences. "I heard about the board vote. You'll do what I never could, honor my father's legacy while building something meaningful of your own. Despite everything, I wish you success." I stared at the screen, a complicated tangle of emotions rising in my chest. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused. Yet in his own way, Miles was conceding that I had won not just the corporate battle, but the moral one as well. Vincent glanced over my shoulder. "Interesting. Perhaps there's a glimmer of Gerald in him after all." I closed the email without replying. Maybe someday I would respond, when the wounds were less raw and the future more certain. For now, I needed to focus on what lay ahead. The elevator doors opened onto the ground floor lobby. Through the glass entrance, I could see reporters gathering, cameras and microphones ready for the press conference scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. Vincent straightened his tie. I smoothed my jacket. Together, we prepared to introduce the world to the new Blackwood Industries. "Ready?" Vincent asked as we approached the doors. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. Not as a burden now, but as a mantle I had chosen to wear. "Ready," I confirmed. As we stepped through the doors into the bright afternoon light, camera flashes exploding around us, I realized something profound had shifted within me. For years, I had defined myself in relation to Miles, to the Blackwood name, to others' expectations. Now, finally, I was defining myself. The transformation wasn't just happening to Blackwood Industries, it was happening to me. Besides, Eleanor continued, "Who better to lead Blackwood Industries than someone who fought to save its soul? Gerald always said the company needed a moral compass. Turns out, that was you all along." After we ended the call, I continued my walk. Eleanor's words echoing in my mind. The idea of leading the entire company, not just the community division I'd carved out for myself, felt both daunting and oddly inevitable, as if the path had been leading here all along. 3 blocks from my new apartment, I passed a construction site surrounded by Blackwood development signs. The project had been one of Miles's initiatives, luxury condominiums aimed at foreign investors, with no affordable housing component despite being in a neighborhood desperately needing it. After the restructuring, I'd pushed to revise the plans, converting 30% of units to middle-income housing and adding ground floor spaces for local businesses. The board had agreed, recognizing that the revised approach would generate less immediate profit, but create lasting community value. I stopped to observe the progress. The foundation was complete, steel beams rising toward the sky, workers in hard hats moving purposefully across the site. Something about seeing the physical manifestation of change, plans on paper becoming concrete reality, struck me deeply. This was what leadership meant: transforming vision into structure, ideas into impact. My phone buzzed again. A text from Lawrence Hoffman. Merger paperwork finalized. BCP now fully independent entity with guaranteed funding. Congratulations. Another piece falling into place. Blackwood Community Partners was now established as a separate public benefit corporation with dedicated funding from the parent company, immune from future leadership changes or profit pressures. The mission I cared about most was secured, regardless of whether I accepted the CEO position, which meant I could decide based on where I could make the greatest difference, not where I needed to be for protection. By the time I reached my apartment, I had my answer. I wrote 2 emails, one to Vincent confirming Thursday's meeting, another to my team at Community Partners calling an all-hands meeting for Friday morning. Whatever happened next, transparency would be my guiding principle. 3. Days later, I sat before the search committee in the same boardroom where everything had changed 6 months earlier. 7 directors studied me with varying expressions of curiosity, respect, and lingering wariness. Vincent observed from the corner, deliberately recusing himself from the process while remaining available for consultation. Before we begin, I said, I want to thank you for this unexpected opportunity. The trust it represents means a great deal to me. Eleanor, who chaired the committee, nodded encouragingly. We've reviewed your work with community partners. The results speak for themselves, but leading the entire organization would be a different challenge entirely. What makes you confident you could succeed? It was the question I'd been preparing for, the obvious concern about my experience level, my qualifications beyond being Gerald's chosen daughter-in-law and Miles's ex-wife. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have been confident, I answered honestly. But the restructuring process taught me something crucial about this company. Its strength comes from alignment between vision and execution, values and strategy. I understand Blackwood's DNA better than most because I've seen it at its best and its worst. I've helped rebuild it from crisis, and I've proven I can make difficult decisions while staying true to core principles. For the next 2 hours, the committee probed every aspect of my background, my leadership approach, my vision for the company's future. I outlined plans for balanced growth, ethical governance, and innovation focused on social impact alongside profit. I acknowledged areas where I would need strong team support, particularly in some technical aspects of the development business, and I made it clear that preserving the restructuring's integrity would be non-negotiable. One final question, Richard Braddock said as the interview wound down. How would you handle the optics of taking this position? The media narrative around your divorce and Miles's departure remains complicated. Some will suggest this was your goal all along. I anticipated this concern too. Perception matters, but substance matters more. My record speaks for itself. The restructuring wasn't about personal gain. It was about saving a company in crisis. I've demonstrated my commitment to Blackwood's values through concrete actions, not just words. As for those who might question my motives, I smiled slightly. Gerald once told Miles that criticism is the tax you pay for leadership. I'm prepared to pay that tax. Eleanor exchanged glances with her colleagues. Something in the room shifted, a collective recognition, perhaps, that we were crossing a threshold together. Thank you, Olivia, she said formally. We'll discuss and advise the full board of our recommendation by week's end. Vincent walked me to the elevator after the committee adjourned. You were remarkable in there, he said quietly. Gerald would have been proud, I know. I finished the familiar refrain with a smile. You've told me that at least weekly for 6 months, because it's true. Vincent's expression grew serious. Whatever they decide, you've already changed Blackwood Industries for the better. Don't forget that. 2 days later, I stood before the combined teams of Blackwood Community Partners, 48 people gathered in our new offices overlooking Union Square. Some I'd known for years through the foundation work. Others were recent hires, brought on for their expertise in education, community development, and social enterprise. All had committed to our mission of transforming how corporate resources could serve community needs. "I have news to share," I began, looking around at the faces watching me expectantly. "Yesterday, the Blackwood Industries Board offered me the position of Chief Executive Officer for the parent company." Murmurs and surprised glances rippled through the room. A few people started to applaud, then hesitated, sensing there was more to come. "This represents an extraordinary opportunity," I continued. "A chance to guide not just our division, but the entire organization according to the principles we've established here. After careful consideration, I've given them my answer." I paused, looking around the room at the team we'd built. Diverse, passionate, committed to meaningful work. "I've declined the position." The surprise was palpable. Several people exchanged confused glances. "Blackwood Industries needs strong leadership," I explained. "It will get that from Diane Mercer, who the board has named as the new CEO effective next month." Diane's legal background, ethical clarity, and deep understanding of the company's recent challenges make her the right choice. I'll remain on the parent company board, helping guide overall strategy while continuing to lead Blackwood. Community partners is my primary focus. Marcus Chen, our operations director, raised his hand. "But wouldn't you have more influence as CEO? More resources for our work?" I appreciated the question. It echoed my own initial thinking. Influence isn't just about position. It's about integrity and clarity of purpose. I can serve our mission better by maintaining our independence and focus than by dividing my attention across the entire corporation. Sometimes the most powerful choice is to say no to more power. As the meeting concluded and the team dispersed, Eleanor approached from the back of the room where she'd been observing quietly. "You surprised us all," she said. "The board was prepared to announce your appointment today." "Diane will be excellent," I replied, "and this is where I belong." Eleanor studied me with knowing eyes. "Gerald made the same choice once, you know. Early in the company's history, he was offered the chance to merge with a larger corporation and become its president. He declined to maintain Blackwood's independence and mission. I didn't know that. Few do. It wasn't the kind of story that made the business press." She squeezed my arm gently. "You've found your purpose, Olivia. That's worth more than any title." That evening, I walked through the community garden our foundation had helped establish in the Bronx. Children played on equipment we'd funded. Parents gathered on benches discussing a neighborhood improvement committee we'd helped organize. A job training program operated from the renovated warehouse next door, preparing residents for careers in green construction and sustainable technology. This was the legacy I wanted to build. Not towers of glass and steel, not acquisitions and mergers, but spaces where people could thrive. Communities that endured. Opportunities that transformed lives across generations. My phone buzzed with a text from Miles. "Heard about your decision. Diane will do well, but they would have been lucky to have you." I smiled, typing back simply, "Right place, right role." His response came quickly. "You always were wiser than me." As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows through the bee garden, I found a quiet bench to sit and reflect. 30 days after discovering my husband's betrayal, I had become the owner of a significant piece of his family enterprise. But the true transformation had nothing to do with ownership or titles. I had reclaimed myself, my values, my voice, my vision for the future. That was the victory that mattered. A young girl approached, perhaps 7 years old, holding a small potted plant from the garden's education program. "Miss Olivia," she said shyly, "we learned how to grow these today. Would you like one?" I accepted the gift with genuine delight. "I would love one. Thank you. What's your name?" "Gabriella," she replied. My mom says you're the lady who helped make our garden. Is that true? I looked around at the thriving space, once an abandoned lot, now a center of community life. I helped a little, I said, but your community did the real work. That's the secret, Gabriela. The best changes happen when people come together around something they believe in. She considered this with serious eyes, then nodded. Like our garden. Exactly like your garden. As Gabriela ran back to join her friends, I cradled the small plant, a physical reminder of growth, resilience, and new beginnings. 30 days had changed the course of my life, but the journey that followed had transformed me in ways I never could have imagined when I stood frozen in Miles's office doorway, watching my marriage crumble before my eyes. That moment of devastating discovery had become, unexpectedly, a doorway to purpose, to authenticity, to a life aligned with my deepest values rather than others' expectations. Sometimes I reflected as twilight deepened around the garden, the things we think will destroy us become the very things that set us free. Thank you for watching today's story. If you were inspired by this journey of transformation, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear that endings can become powerful new beginnings. Subscribe for more stories of resilience and renewal, and I'll see you in the next video. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.